here at 7 o'clock.
All right. The city administrator is chiding me for being 30 seconds past due.
Informing you.
Thank you so much for the information.
Duly noted.
All right. Hey, everybody. This is a workshop. That means we're doing our homework, and you all can listen in and only talk if we ask you to participate. It is a hybrid meeting, which means you could be online as well. I actually have an announcement first, and I will do it again at the official meeting, and I will put out probably a video on Channel 22, which is about assessment letters. So about this time, around the 1st of May, we send out letters for changes in assessment. We are a full value assessment community, which means your assessment should be somewhere in the ballpark of market value, usually a little bit less. And it's really important to understand what that means. I've been looking to get actually some explanatory information in our letters, and it hasn't happened. This is kind of boilerplate, but let me explain what the issue is. All our assessments in Beacon went up a lot this year. Our taxes will only go up a tiny bit, right? Now, tiny bit, the way that we can ensure it's only a tiny bit is if this group on the table, when we're doing our budget, only increase the tax levy, that's the total tax pie, by a tiny bit. If we do that, that means whatever your assessments are, it doesn't matter. And I'll tell you how this works. So my particular home went up a lot, about 16 or 17%. I can't calculate it exactly. But as I understand it, all homes in the residential portion of our tax base, so the 1 and 2 and 3 family homes, all went up by about that amount. Now, some may have gone up more and some may have gone up less. It will depend on the circumstances. But if every home in Beacon goes up by exactly the same percentage, nothing happens to your taxes. That means your share of the total tax pie remains identical, right? What will happen is the tax rate will drop by that same percentage unless this table here raises the tax levy, right? So that's how this works. So my expectation is, okay, it went up 15, 16%. That means our tax rate is going to come down by about that amount unless at budget time we raise the total tax levy. Now, in addition, each year the last several years, our tax base has gotten bigger, not because properties have increased in value, but there's more properties, right? So there's new properties coming online. Last year it was in the 2 to 3% range. This year it's in the 2 to 3% range again. Now what that means is we can increase the tax levy by that 2 or 3%, and it doesn't affect any existing taxpayer, right? Because it's new property, right? So we're going to get that benefit again, where the first 2 or 3%, there's an exact number, our assessor will tell us what that is. And then anything above that will hit taxpayers, right? So we'll see that when budget time comes, but that's when this will occur. But I can bet a lot of money that people's taxes aren't going up 15% on average or whatever this average is. Okay, so I just want to make sure people are aware of that. And it's a complicated area, so I'll say it a couple of times, and I'll also put it on TV. This is one area I actually am pretty knowledgeable in. Well, any questions on that?
The letter that people are receiving won't have the actual taxes they owe yet.
Correct.
Because that happens at later points.
Right. What happens in May is the assessment letters go out saying, hey, we looked as of July 1, we came up with this number for all the properties. Because we're a full value community, everyone gets one of these letters, even if it doesn't change. And then you have an opportunity to grieve your assessment toward the end of May, and there's a process for that, and we'll share that information as well. Right, but then none of it, well, the first bill that will take into account the new assessments is the school tax. That comes in the fall, right? But again, whether the school tax is up is a function of what the school board does in terms of approving their budget and how much they approve it by. But they too will have that first 2 or 3% kind of a freebie because that's all new properties coming in online in Beacon. Okay? Any other questions? And we'll do it again at the formal meeting because we might have more people watching, and I'll put it out on a video as well.
And just for those who don't know, the school board is actually entirely different from the city, but I believe they also have a budget process going on right now, so you can visit their website if you want to find out more about that.
Right, and they're having an election this month, and that's actually the lion's share of the property tax in Beacon. There is this very small piece that's a library budget tax, and then there's two other components. Those occur in the fall. And then in January is the portion that's the city and the county. So there's 4 taxes spread across 2 bills. Okay.
Mary, I just want to let you know Dan Imar-Blair is on a call with us now.
Yeah, I saw Dan. Good.
Yeah, he was on.
Glad you're still alive. Hope you're okay. Okay. That's all I had. I just wanted to make that one announcement. And any questions that will help explain to the community what's up, I think will be helpful for them, and we'll keep pushing that information out, okay? All right. First topic is short-term rentals. And what I wanted to do here is 2 things. I wanted Nick to take us through what's in our current short-term rental law, because the only ones at the table, oh, Dan's here. So Dan and George and I went through this when the law was passed, but we'd also like to get everyone up to speed on what's in the law, what we were thinking at the time, how it works. And then after we get that introduction, we want to talk about an opportunity to work with the county to identify what the short-term rentals are in the community and whether that would help us in terms of getting them all registered and figuring out the ones that are, aren't supposed to be there. And we'll get Dave Buckley involved in that shortly. Okay? All right, so Nick, are you online?
I am indeed.
Okay.
So good evening, everyone.
Welcome back.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. So the regulation of short-term rentals was discussed by the City Council extensively, actually over the course of, I think, 3 years, 2018, 2019, and 2020. A number of draft local laws were discussed before it was adopted in June of 2020. And Beacon, like many communities, were trying to understand the appropriate way within their community to regulate short-term rentals. It was our position, our office's position, that Beacon's zoning ordinance addressed short-term rentals in the prior version by stating that it was not a permitted use, and therefore the city would have to adopt regulations to allow it. And the city had a number of workshop meetings, public hearings, and discussions sort of come to a consensus as to how to regulate short-term rentals. Again, it was something that many communities in the Hudson Valley and across actually the country, big cities, small cities, San Francisco, Texas, and Houston, and other communities were all trying to address and determine how best to regulate it. And it belongs in the zoning ordinance because you're talking about how to regulate the use of land, how a house is being used or a dwelling unit is being used. Is it being used for a single family home, for a single family to house a single family, or is it being used for accessory use like a rental apartment? So the city of Beacon ultimately landed on being a permissive statute that allows short-term rentals. And short-term rentals are allowed in all zoning districts, and they're also allowed in one-family homes, two-family homes, accessory apartments, or multiple dwelling units. And if you look at section 222-26.5, which is in the packet, that's where the city's regulation of short-term rentals lies. And in section A is entitled Findings. I'm just going to read a little bit from it because you'll provide a little bit of the background of the discussion that the city had over several meetings and where the city council at that time ended up with. And it reads that the city council has determined it is in the best interest of the city and its residents to regulate short-term rentals. The city council recognizes the benefits of short-term rentals to allow homeowners to supplement their income, to defray the cost of housing, and to provide lodging for visitors to the city. And then it states it's necessary to restrict the rental of dwelling units for less than 30 days. It talks about some studies that have found that there were impacts on the rental market. And then it sets forth that by this section, the city council seeks to allow short-term rentals in dwelling units located in single-family homes, two-family homes, accessory apartments, and multifamily dwellings. And the city chose in its regulations to really allow it in what I characterize as 4 distinct areas. One, a short-term rental, an STR, needs to register with the city. 2, they need to be inspected for compliance with the code from a health and safety standpoint. 3, the law requires that the short-term rental be located in a dwelling unit that is the property owner's primary residence. And the goal there was to make sure that it wasn't being owned by investors and it wasn't taking housing units off of the market, but rather it was the primary residence, and it was either the whole house being rented out while someone was away or removed from their residence for a period of time, or it was a room or rooms within that dwelling unit. And also the requirement was that it could be rented for no more than 100 days. And if you go through the zoning ordinance in section 223-26.5, we have a number of dwelling definitions: occupied primary residence, short-term rental. All of those are defined. Section E sets forth the permit application and what's required for you to receive your short-term rental. Paragraph F talks about the inspection, and paragraph G is the one that talks about it should be unlawful to use or operate a short-term rental if the property is not an occupied primary residence. And we have definitions of occupied primary residence and also what documents can be provided to establish that. Then we have certain standards that need to be complied with in section H. And then in section K through the rest of it really talks about revoking that short-term permit, how you can appeal that process, and then for enforcement. And section K1F provided for a different enforcement scheme for multiple dwelling units, recognizing that that might have more of an impact if you have, your neighbors are immediate, it's not the house. So there was a special provision written in that if you have 3 substantial written complaints in a 12-month period concerning the use of the premises as short-term rental, then the permit to allow a short-term rental could be revoked. So Beacon recognized that short-term rentals should be regulated, but they should be allowed in all zoning districts. And it was just a matter of making sure that they were registered. Short-term rentals are not prohibited. In terms of enforcement, it's really on a case-by-case basis. And at that time, the city recognized that it would be a complaint-based enforcement. The city wasn't going out and spending the resources to investigate and evaluate who was doing a short-term rental, but rather it would be, as it is with any enforcement of the city's zoning ordinance, quite frankly, based upon the complaints received from residents. And the short-term rental law, there are areas of it which can be difficult to enforce. For example, the 100-day requirement. And this was discussed by the council at the time it was adopted, that the council was interested in regulating it and restricting it to owner-occupied units, but also having a 100-day limitation. But there's a recognition that that can be difficult to enforce, and the law requires that the individuals who are issued the short-term rental permit provide that upon request from the city, but it's something that would be difficult to enforce. Likewise with the actual issue of, is someone operating a short-term rental? On some of these platforms, it does not give you the specific address. The city could do a sting operation and go out and rent a short-term rental and then determine if it is actually rented, and then that would be a violation of the law. But that's obviously time and resources that they would have to dedicate to that. Likewise, with establishing the primary residence, there are criteria set forth in the law. The burden of proof is on the city then to go through and establish that it is not an individual's primary residence. And again, it's a matter of the enforcement and the burden being on the city to establish that it has, to the satisfaction of the court, established that any of those individuals have not been in compliance with the law. But given that the intent here is to allow short-term rentals, it's not particularly difficult for someone to establish that they're in compliance, because it's allowed in all zoning districts. It's allowed in single-family homes, two-family homes, multiple dwelling units, and you just need to register by establishing that you are the owner-occupant of that unit. So that is a overview of the zoning ordinance as it was adopted in June of 2020. I don't know, Mayor, if there are specific questions or if Dave has some of the points that I may not have included or referenced.
Yeah, let me ask a couple of clarifying questions. So if I live in a single-family home and I want to rent out a room without separating it out, that's a short-term rental. As long as that's my primary residence, I can do that?
That is correct.
And then if I also live in that primary residence and I go away for the month of June and I want to rent it out for a couple of weeks, that also counts as a short-term rental and I'd have to register?
That is correct.
Okay, and then switching over to, I live in a house, I have an accessory dwelling unit, not in the house, right? So I'm not renting a room, but I'm renting, the accessory dwelling unit. Can I do that if I'm the primary resident of the house? Can I rent out the accessory unit?
No, Dave will correct me if I'm wrong. No, it needs to be within the actual primary dwelling unit. So an accessory dwelling unit could not be rented as a short-term rental.
Okay, so yeah, I would just want to ask these, right?
Yep.
Can we dig into that again? Then what accessory apartment would be allowed? Nick?
If the accessory apartment were rented by the tenant who resided in it, then the tenant could do so, but the property owner would not be able to rent the accessory unit.
So,
Right, so if you have a tenant who was living there, the tenant then would be in a position to do so.
yep, that was going to be my next question. So what you're saying is that in this law, we said if you're not living in the unit as your primary residence, you can't rent that out, right? In a short term. You can rent it out long term as much as you like, just not short term. Right? And then the next one you raised, so I'm not the owner, I'm the tenant. Let's say I'm a tenant in an apartment or I'm a tenant in an accessory dwelling unit. As the tenant, I could also do a short-term rental if my landlord approved it.
That's right. The permit application requires that the landlord's consent be indicated on that application.
Okay. And then if I'm an apartment owner, I own, I don't know, 8 units, whatever, and can I rent any of those out as a short-term rental?
The answer to that would be no, because you could not be an owner. You'd have to be the owner-occupant, and B, you as the owner-occupant, you'd have to occupy all 8 of those units.
Right. But if I lived in one of those apartments, I could rent that out, regardless of whether I'm the owner or the tenant. Right?
That is correct.
Got it. Everybody okay with that? I'm just trying to explain how we set this up.
So in a multifamily unit, or a multifamily house, similarly, you could do a short-term rental on the unit which you occupied, but not on any additional unit in that house. Is that correct?
That is correct. So if it were a 2-family unit, for example, the family lived in unit 1, they could not short-term rental unit 2.
Great.
Because they did not live in that.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and that was different, and I appreciate you letting me take you through those, because I remember this was a long process, and when we started this, we were not as focused on the impact on the rental housing market of short-term rentals, and I think we were allowing more of them than the final law that we ended up with. The final law we ended up with is pretty restrictive. It's got to be the one that you're living in, that you're short-term rentaling out. Okay? Okay. Any other questions on how the current law works?
Have we kept a record of complaints? How many there have been? How many were dismissed? If any were substantiated and then appealed? Do we have any of that data on numbers?
We have Dave Buckley, our building inspector, with us, and
Good evening.
we do.
Great.
I'll let him speak to it.
Since the law was passed, we maybe have 5 complaints.
Okay.
And that means for each time there was a complaint, you kind of checked in on it?
What we do is if we receive a complaint, we send a letter out advising them of the law and the requirement to register.
Mm-hmm.
And can you share the nature of the complaints, if they were quality of life or?
Early on with the law, some of them were actually COVID-related. Some neighbors and people of the public were concerned that a lot of people from the city were coming up here, and so there was that concern. The other one, the main complaint really, I think, is some people are not comfortable with not knowing their permanent neighbors. You know, so the 30 days and the changeover, you know, to some people is maybe you know, a little concerning.
But difficult to substantiate.
Yes. I'd just like to point out too that the owner-occupied requirement, the definition is difficult for us because it says for your primary occupied residence, you have to reside there most of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So it you know, just for clarification, it's not a 24/7, 365 requirement.
Which would be the same requirement, you know, for a permanent address on any legal document. It would either be where you vote or, you know, that you state on your taxes or something like that. Wouldn't it?
Well, I'm sorry,
I
George.
mean, to declare your permanent residence.
The definition is your primary occupied residence.
Right, and that's
Yes.
determined by where you vote or where you're registered to vote or maybe on your tax
Utility
forms.
bills. They sign an affidavit that says that a sworn affidavit that it is their primary occupied residence with the application.
I guess the biggest problem I
And
have.
if I could just
Yeah.
add one thing, when if they apply, they also have to provide proof of receipt of the STAR credit or STAR property tax exemption for that property. So they would have to comply with the rules of it being their primary residence for purposes of STAR, which
Right.
is that rebate or diminishment of the school tax.
Which you only get on one home.
You can only take it on one
Yes.
property.
Right. I guess the biggest problem I have with the way the law is written right now is that, and I understand the difficulty of enforcement, is that it's based on complaints. And I think we could all agree that, I mean, I know many freestanding buildings that are being rented out full-time for Airbnb, not occupied by anyone. And I've heard about a lot of apartments being taken off the market. And there's not actually people complaining about that, but I think it's having an insidious effect on the market in town, and I think it's ultimately, you know, helping to sort of break down the sense of community that we have by not knowing your neighbors, and so the point is, I know it's an impossible thing. There's so many impossibilities in this, but if we could get the data. And I don't know if you've all heard about what they're doing in Highland and Cold Spring. They've got software, and I think the county uses it as well, and maybe that's what you're going to refer to in terms of getting their systems.
Yeah, I can give you an update on that.
Yeah, but I think, you know, at least we would get the data of what is actually happening in town, and then work almost backwards as to how we can fix it.
Yeah, that's up to this point. That's what we don't have.
Yeah.
We don't have an inventory of unregistered STRs.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that would be so simple if we found them being advertised, and we just sent out, you know, warnings, or, you know, if they're not registered and they're legally bound to register, and they would have to pay a penalty. I think that would have an immediate impact.
We would have to take them to court. So
Yeah.
think about two things that Dave and I talk about. We are trying to get that information, and I'll talk about the service that's been made available to us. You're regulating these. You're not getting rid of most of them. So the only ones you'd be getting rid of are ones that are not primary homes for the person.
Right.
And then the second part of that is, even if you identify those, we have the burden of proof when we go into court to say you're doing this for, you know, you're in violation of the law, and that becomes more and more difficult, and time consuming.
Yeah, I guess I agree, and I'm sure that's the case, but I think no one's going to follow the law if they know it's not being, you know, followed through on. So I think we have to, even if it takes us an investment on our part, an early investment, I think it's going to, you know, have a slow impact on on people not obeying the law, so.
I think to Chris's point, you know, whatever enforcement we go through to get there, they're still only going to be just filing for a permit.
Well,
They're still operating now, and we go through this enforcement, and, you know, then they're going to get a permit, but they're going to still be operating.
Right, but I think there's two categories that are out there. We just don't know how many there are. There are the ones that aren't registered that are eligible and can register, right? Those are the ones you're mentioning. And then there's also the ones that are out there that actually don't comply with our law, right? They're not owner-occupied. And by being able to identify what's out there, it would be certainly nice to get the ones to register, but it also would be important to get the ones that don't qualify to stop doing it.
But again, just to emphasize that definition is very difficult for us, that you have to reside at the property most of the year. That's a very difficult enforcement.
Yep, and we should take a minute to hear what, Chris, you were talking to the county. Maybe you could kind of bring that piece of information to the table, because I think we can divide the issues into parts, and you know, I think this is a start. But let's.
I think the 100-day limit of being able to rent it out, I think that information could easily be gotten from, you know, this data retrieval companies.
If it can be from the county, but we don't currently have the...
No, we don't have it now, but I think having
the availability to monitor that.
Whether or not we prove that they live there or not, they've gone over the 100 days.
Yeah, but, well, we may find that out with the county.
Yeah.
It's just, but right now, we don't have that ability to track the 100 days.
Because I think that's what's really having the impact on the housing market here, is those things that are being completely taken off the rental market and only being used as short-term rentals. So I think that's an easy thing.
So in terms of the information that we can get, the county is working with a number of municipalities on a program called GovService Host Compliance. It's through a company called Granicus, which actually we have another subscription for. And the county's interest in having these registered is that they collect a 4% hotel tax. So in exchange for us as a community helping to get these registered, they will pay the annual cost of the subscription for Granicus. Apparently there are more than 60 vacation rental sites that are monitored regularly through their AI. They note that more than 4,500 governments use their services, and we've set up a call later this week to understand what the interface with that system looks like, what data we get. An initial conversation lets us know that they can pinpoint these on a map. They don't have addresses for everyone, and they will find out more about whether or not they can give us the number of days these are rented. And so that could give us information. And then there's a part of this software package where you can generate letters out to the person doing the short-term rental from that system. But again, it only gets you so far. We send a letter, and then if they don't respond, that's when this gets more difficult. Then you write another letter, and they don't respond. And then at some point, we have to pull them into court. Luckily, in your law, you have, if somebody is listed on one of these sites, there's a presumption that that is proof that they are doing a short-term rental. And Nick, is that correct? Just fact check me on that.
Yeah, no, that's correct. That is a provision we built into the law, that there's a presumption of evidence. So we would have to go to court, produce a copy of the listing. The court would then say that's presumptive evidence under the law, and it's then a rebuttable presumption, meaning the individual would then have the burden of establishing that they have not established a short-term rental and that they're not actually listing. They listed, but they never were successful. But we built that in there to sort of make it clear that's prima facie evidence. And that's in section I, presumptive evidence.
Now, we had the same issue earlier this year with short-term rental of pools, because there's applications like Swimply where people are renting their pool out by the hour. That was causing generating a lot of complaints in neighborhoods. And we again got to the point, well, how do I know that's a transaction? As opposed to, oh, that's just a bunch of my friends I had over. And we don't have that system in place for Swimply, but we can get this now for short-term rentals that are involve apartments.
See, and the way let's assume there's 100 units out there of short-term rentals, just make up a number. And let's say that 25 have registered. Hey, that's great. I think there's more out there, and I think fewer have registered, but it doesn't matter. We'll just use rough numbers. So of the remaining 75, if we use the county process, we'll at least identify the universe of 100, and we'll know, okay, we've got 75 that aren't registered. The question would be, if they're owner-occupied, which we probably have a reasonable ability to figure that piece out by looking at tax records and assessments. I'm less concerned about, 25 of those 75 are owner-occupied, and my only concern is the 100-day limit. Less important to me. The more important would be the 50 out there that, and remember, I'm just making numbers up, that don't qualify at all under our statute, but are out there. Those are the ones that I think are affecting the market, that we have a pretty good case. We don't have to prove how many days. It's just you don't even qualify. And that seems more of a slam dunk. And I think that our letters to them could be direct enough that even the letters might encourage them to pull them off the market and just rent them out as regular rentals, right? Which is what we would like to see.
And the county did give us a number. From 2019 or 2020, there were 142 units listed, and I think we have 11 permits.
Okay.
Okay.
So.
And did those permits come in just since the law was passed, just in the past year and a half, those 11?
No, when the law was passed, I spoke with Nick, and we actually put a grace period in because we thought we were really going to be bombarded and with all the applications. So I would say we're getting a little more activity now with the STR permits. So I would say it wasn't initially upfront. It was very few upfront. But as time has gone on, we've seemed to be getting a little, not a lot, but a little bit more, with the permitting. So it's been more recent than it has early.
And Dave, is there a fee for the permit?
$150.
And is there a fine for non-compliance?
For?
I guess that would be something to figure out in the future.
No, it's in our general code.
It is. It's in so it refers to the general section of a code in which the court has the discretion to grant a fine of up to $1,000 per violation. And Dave is correct with this phase-in period. Again, it was adopted in June of 2020, just as COVID was taking its full impact, and it provided for registration after October 1st of 2020, because the council recognized that were some booking commitments that would have extended beyond June, right into July or August, and so it was deemed to phase it in to allow those commitments to be honored, as well as so the building department didn't get a rush of permits.
Yep, so with those numbers, 140, I'd be thrilled if 70 of them would qualify and register, and I'd be even more thrilled if there were 70 that didn't qualify that then decided to do regular rentals, right? And those are the ones I think have the biggest impact on our market. If someone's living if it's their primary residence and they're renting it out for more than 100 days, it's still their primary residence. They can only do it once. They can't do it on 4 other units, right? That seems less of a priority than trying to chase down the ones that don't even qualify under our law that we might get data on now.
Mm-hmm.
Has this, you say that Granicus program is being used in other municipalities, for how long? And has there been any, feedback as to its impact on the short-term rental market?
I'm hoping to hear more on Friday when we do the call.
Uh-huh.
And people power as well, do we have the people power compared to other municipalities who have adopted that AI? I could ask that question now, but we don't know because we only know 142.
Right. Well, and we don't know if that changed. That could have gone down because of COVID. Mm-hmm. I think the short-term rentals died down a lot during COVID because people may not have wanted to use them or have people coming into their apartments during that time.
Right.
Sort of an
we'll-
aside, but, sorry, it's a little bit of an aside, but do we get any of that, the hotel tax from the county?
You get, no, but you get marketed for tourism. So the hotel tax is earmarked for tourism promotion.
Uh-huh.
And when the county goes out and does conferences and other things to promote the county, Beacon is included in that. But we don't get any direct tax. You can put your own tax on. Newburgh has proposed to do that. Nick, is it a 3% tax that the locality can do?
I have to confirm, but I believe it's in that neighborhood, Chris, yes.
So we would need, and I think that requires legislative approval from the state legislature, right?
That's correct. It requires a local law request by municipality to Albany that they adopt a law. Both houses have to pass, and then the governor has to sign it. There used to be resistance to those types of local hotel taxes, but that seems to have gone away, and it's more readily granted. But it requires local support.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I would go in that direction because the way we wrote the law, we said only owner occupied. I'm not sure I want to try to collect tax revenue from those people. I mean, they're owner occupied. They live in the city. They live in that home. If it were much broader, I'd say we should, but it's pretty narrow. I think I'm more interested in getting the 140 down to the either registered or pushed out.
Somewhat related question. Are we allowed to increase that $1,000 fine limit, or is that determined? I wasn't clear from the answer what that was determined by.
Nick, did you hear
Sure,
that?
that's it.
Yeah.
I did, Chris. Thanks. So it's in General Section 1.3 of the City Code, which sets forth that it's a fine not to exceed $1,000, and that's really defined because if anything above that or imprisonment longer than 15 days would then be considered a felony. And so it's kept at those levels so that it's a misdemeanor, and it's at the discretion of the court. We could modify it to make it specific in the zoning ordinance and say an amount no less than, but even there, courts use their discretions as to whether or not a penalty should be imposed.
And we found that, and Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's $1,000 a day per day of violation, right?
That's correct.
So we have found from other enforcement that we used to have $250, and that didn't get a lot of mileage. So when we increased it, and I don't know when it was, but it was years ago, to 1,000. So 1,000 a day per day of violation is significant. It adds up fast.
I don't think we understood that it was per day. That's a big
That
difference.
makes more sense.
Sorry, can I
Dan.
get a word in?
Yep.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that one of the things that we're talking about is building the capacity of the city government, maybe particularly the building department, so that we can have more proactive policing of these units. It seems to me that if we want to increase capacity, we're going to need money, and that maybe we should be setting up a fund where all of the fees, fines, and everything that we collect with regards to non-compliance goes into this. But it's also an argument for having a 3% tax on Airbnb, because that could generate the revenue that builds the building department capacity to enforce the law. So I think there is an argument to make for the tax, which is that enforcing all this is not free.
Yep. So, again, I just trying to prioritize, of the 140, if half don't qualify, I'd love to see all 70 of those out the door and rented as regular units, right? I mean, anything more than 30 days is great. And then if the other half are all, qualified, then I'd certainly like them registered. But I'll be honest, knowing your budget and knowing how much revenue of the building department is generated, I'm not too worried about you not having funds. If you tell us you need horsepower in terms of staff, of course, we'll figure that out. But I'm not hearing that. I'm not hearing that from you, Dave. Am I or not?
I'm sorry, Lee?
I'm not hearing that you're short-handed, right?
No, and I'd like to, see more about the county program first before we really start discussing, staffing and shortfalls.
Yep. Yeah, and I don't think I think the real resource expenditure is when you say, I'm going to have to take someone to court. I'm sort of least interested in that, right? I'm sort of more interested in trying to get compliance of those who do qualify and those who clearly don't, for them to be aware of how clear-cut it is so that they don't bother trying to continue and
Right.
force us to take them to court.
So, I mean, just for the council's info, the way that prosecutions work is at first an order to remedy is issued, citing the violation with a time frame on it, and then if the time frame is not complied with, that's what triggers an order to remedy violation to proceed to court. That's the next step. So we always try to make sure that if we send an order to remedy, that we can prove it, because we understand that the next step is to go to court.
Got it.
And Dave, for the council, when you go to court, does Keenan Bean accompany you in court?
Generally, no. Most of our prosecutions are fairly simple. I can't say right now. I don't think we're to that point yet to know that with these STRs.
And the court would be here?
Yeah. City court.
It would be.
Yeah.
And we work with Dave's office on the enforcement and gathering the evidence and making sure that he has the support that he needs.
Yeah, and other than the 100 days, let's just put those aside, right? Just the ones that they're not owner-occupied and they're on the list, right? That's an easier one to kind of figure out how to show.
I'm hoping that, as you said, that the county be able to help us with, the owner-occupied portion of it and the number of days, which right now for us is not possible.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the number of days. If we just say, is owner-occupied, fine, just make them register. If not owner-occupied, send them a letter. Right?
Yeah, again, it's the definition that's difficult in this case.
Yep. Yeah, and
most of the year is very ambiguous.
So once we have the conversation with Granicus, they can actually tell us how many units we have, and they'll give us a cost proposal as well, because it's based on the number of units.
Okay.
And we can bring that back, and then we can figure out what our next steps are.
Okay.
I think there's one other step too, Lee, and that's the inspection.
Right, which we definitely want, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons to get them to register, right? We actually want it to be safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the inspection, the short-term rentals, they require the same thing as any other dwelling unit, or is there something special that we would look for?
I would call it a cursory inspection. We're not going into your house to write up 20 pages of violations. We're checking the size of the room, making sure nobody's using a closet, as an STR room. We're checking the window size, and then just, which is extremely important, basic smoke detector and carbon monoxide coverage. Which a lot of houses are deficient in if they haven't had a project or interaction with either the fire department or the building department.
Okay. So are we good to go the next step of trying to see what it's going to, cost to get it from the county?
Yes.
Yeah, and if it makes sense, I'll bring back an agreement for your approval to join the program with the county.
Okay. And it won't guarantee that we can figure them all out, but it's that first step, and we'll start to look at what the data starts to tell us.
I'd be curious to also get feedback from Granicus if we do move forward with them about our law, and if there are ways to structure this that make it more enforceable in their experience.
Okay, I don't know that they do that, but let me find out.
Nope, that's on us. I actually think we ended up with one of the earlier laws, right? I don't think there were a lot out there at the time, at least not locally. I think we were ahead of folks.
You were, Mayor, and I can tell you that the city's law served as a model for other communities who decided to find a way to regulate and allow them and have the inspection clause.
Okay.
If we do end up revisiting the law, and I know we haven't made that decision yet, that I think the 100-day requirement would also be something I'd be curious to talk about, whether or not it's worth having in our law anymore. I wouldn't necessarily revisit it just for that, but if we're visiting it anyway, that might be a thing to bring up and decide upon.
Yep.
I just want to say that we have to have some number of days required, because if you're not in your house 365 days a year, how is it your primary residence?
So I'm imagining, George, and this is something, not George, sorry, Dan, that there's, you're an empty nester, you have a home, you had a family, and the family has moved out for a variety of actually larger economic reasons. You actually cannot sell your home and move into something else, which is a whole separate conversation. And so because of that, what you do is you then rent out a room in your house, and you decide that you like it, and you find people that you like, and so you continue to live there and have a series of people come through. And that might be the situation for people in Beacon, other communities. So in that case, it might end up being over 100 days, and also it is your primary residence. So that might actually be true, the number of our older residents here in Beacon. And it might not be, but that's an example of why it might not actually be a good fit for our community.
I think 100 days is an exemption for when you're not present at the home. You can have 100 days where you are not in the home. Am I misremembering this?
Yeah, I'm just pulling up that language one moment.
Because the 100 days, I remember calculating it was.
No, it's not. It says the short-term rental of an entire dwelling unit, is limited to 100 days in any one calendar year.
And so I actually, when we were working on that law in the last council, I was advocating for a smaller number. That is basically every single weekend of the year. So someone could be here on weekdays and go on a weekend trip every weekend and rent out their home. And that's disruptive. That's part of the disruption that George is talking about. I think 100 days is far too high. But I think we do have to have a number limiting that.
Yeah, but that's also the part that's hard to enforce. So that'll be sort of the trade-off. I guess.
We don't know yet. Yeah, we don't know yet, but it may be the hardest part.
Yep. But we've already got it where it's only if it's your primary residence. If you're an owner, you got a star exemption. If that's what you take your star exemption on, I'm good, right? Because you only get one of those in the whole state. If you're a renter, I doubt that you're renting multiple apartments. I guess you could. But again, I'm kind of less concerned there because I think the main thing we were trying to do was get the ones that have, 10 houses and rent out all 10. And we will be able to identify that pretty cleanly. Even if one of those becomes the person's primary residence, we get 9 back on the market. Same with apartments. We said all the apartments, if you own it, unless you live in the one, and then only the one you live in. So I think that this is sort of the small part of the problem. So I'm willing to look at what Molly's suggestion is. I'm not saying we know any of the answers, but I'm willing to kind of work on that a little bit.
I also do think for this conversation, it's important to realize we don't have a lot of hotels in Beacon, and this is filling a critical role for short-term lodging for visitors. And we know that from data that the county puts out that when somebody stays overnight, they spend a lot more money in a community than if they come up and do a day trip. So it's also like this is playing a role in our local economy, and I don't think we should, we have to balance it, but I don't think we should lose sight of some of the positive benefits of having that visitation and having people come spend money in Main Street businesses and stay for more than a few hours.
It just boils down to the abuse of the current law, I think, and there are landlords that I'm fully aware of are completely abusing this law.
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. All right. Well, we're not going to solve it all in a day, but I think what we said was let's take the step of seeing if we can get that data. That will give us hard locations, and then we can start to analyze.
What we got.
What do we got? All right. Is that good?
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah,
Yep.
thank you.
Go home. Okay, anything else on this topic? All right, Next one.
Sorry.
Sir, please, Paloma.
We had discussed at one point considering a mailer or some such about housing information for owners and renters alike, and just sort of getting the information out there, making sure people are aware of all of the various housing-related laws we have. And I'm not sure where that sort of lies in our priorities or on the agenda, but I just wanted to bring it back up as an idea.
Okay.
I'll second that idea. I think it's an important one that we should take a look at.
Okay. Yeah, it's a
I
different
think
topic,
that's a
but-
whole nother discussion, because what laws you're going to target?
Yep.
Who's going to write this? Who's going to do this mailing? Again, I think we want to, I would suggest we focus on the issue at hand, which is as the mayor said, any of these units that are not primary residences, and focus our outreach on that rather than trying to figure out every housing law and send a mailer. I don't know, Nick, are you comfortable with us even doing that?
Well, I think the question becomes, there are resources where that's already provided by other agencies that we could refer them to. We've done a number of community segments, but for the city to offer opinions on housing laws and compliance and how that works, I think is going to be problematic. We'd have to see more of the details.
One other,
I mean, I really wanted to do a mailer. Sorry, Paloma, I'm having a hard time finding my place in the conversation, so I didn't mean to interrupt. I'll just quickly say that some of us wanted to do a mailer around the substance of good cause eviction for not just for tenants, but also what it meant for landlords. So perhaps this could be kind of like a more general memo or a general mailer.
one other idea that a constituent proposed to me was to just have a mailer that said, these are the different ways that you can find out what the city of Beacon is doing. Like, she did not know that we had a Swift 911 system, for example. I didn't realize that we even had a Facebook page. And maybe we can sort of scale back what is actually on the postcard itself to be a little bit more general, and make sure that the resources are really clear on our website, which they largely are, but.
Yep, I think, you know, being able to reach folks is an important part of what we have to do as a community, but I think it's another discussion. That's,
Sure.
and you know, we'll get there, right? Yeah, it's amazing, right? Because you think, we got Swift 911, we've got emails, we've got website, we've got social media, and I will be honest, for me, the absolute way to ensure that I hear people is I go knock on doors. And when you do that every couple of years, or in this new chair every fourth year, you hear a lot and you get to people that you can't ordinarily get to. But yeah, let's put it up as a topic at some point, all right?
Thanks.
Yep, absolutely. So the next one is whether we want to allow members of the city council to participate via video conferencing. I think this is the state law. Nick, will you explain this one to us?
I will. So prior to the pandemic, New York State open meetings law allowed board members, council members, members of any public body to attend a meeting virtually via video conferencing. You could never, and you still can't, call in via telephone. It needs to be audio and video conferencing. The situation that the old law, the current law required pre-pandemic, was that if you were attending video conferencing, you had to provide 72 hours notice, so that it could be noticed. You had to allow the public to attend in that location. And arguably that location also had to be ADA accessible. So if you were in Hawaii, you could go on vacation, still attend a meeting, but you had to give 72 hours notice that you would be at the Marriott and the people could come and attend in your room or in the lobby, wherever you noticed the meeting. Obviously during the pandemic, that became difficult because you wanted to socially distance from people. So that's why there were a series of executive orders, the most recent of which expires on May 15th. Those executive orders suspended that requirement under the open meetings law that the public had the right to attend at the virtual meeting location where the board member was at, whether it was in your house or elsewhere. The proposed amendment, which is to section 103A, not the proposed, the adopted amendment rather, dispenses with the requirement of, if you're attending virtually, that you have to allow the public to attend. It also dispenses with the requirement that it's 72 hours advance notice has to be given, recognizing people become sick on less than 72 hours notice. So the new law would have to be affirmatively enacted by the council to allow the council members or other public bodies to attend virtually without giving 72 hours notice and excluding the public from that remote location. A couple of caveats. The law, is what I'm referring to as 103A, that allows non-public attendance virtual meeting, only allows a minority of the membership to attend. A majority must still be attending in person via the traditional ways, either in person or by a pre-pandemic open meetings law virtual video conferencing notification. So if 4 council members suddenly are unavailable for a meeting on less than 72 hours notice, they could not avail themselves of this section 103A exemption provision, because you would not be, because then you would have less than a majority in person via the traditional public noticing period. There's also some other requirements, and we put forth those in a little chart that's in your packet that sort of walks you through the differences. But the important one is that it can only be a less than a majority. You can't have a full council or even a majority of the council attending via the new 103A amendment. There's also some additional administrative burden. If you do this 103A exemption, you have to provide a transcript upon request. Under the traditional video conferencing pre-pandemic, you did not have to provide a transcript. Under the executive order, you do have to provide a transcript. Additionally, you're only allowed to take advantage of this 103A requirement, right? The virtual attendance on less than 72 hours notice and only a minority composition of the board, if there are extraordinary circumstances. You need to adopt a policy defining what those extraordinary circumstances are. It's within your discretion. The state law gives you some examples of that, and you have a draft policy that you would need to adopt by resolution. And the section B of that draft policy sets forth disability, illness, health concerns, caregiving responsibilities, business trips, or catch-all, other significant or unexpected factor or event which precludes the member's physical attendance at the meeting. So this isn't exactly what legislative bodies were hoping Albany would adopt. Many people were hoping that Albany would adopt a much more broader virtual attendance policy because quite frankly, I think everyone's experience is being positive with the virtual attendance and the accessibility to government. But the Albany is considering other versions of the law, but the only current version that's been adopted is this minor modification to the open meetings law that allows virtual attendance subject to adoption of a policy in extraordinary circumstances, and you don't need to provide 72 hours notice, you don't need to provide notice, and you don't have to allow the public to attend. So the 2 discussion points for the council are, do you wish to allow the council members to take advantage of this modified open meetings law video conferencing requirement? You could allow other public bodies, you have that authority. We have not provided for that in this local law because in discussions with the administration, the meetings of the planning board and zoning board are not held virtually, they're not hybrid meetings, and that would create some extra costs and administrative burden, and those members certainly have the ability to take advantage of the existing open meetings law provision as well. And you'd have to then, if you agree to go ahead with the law, schedule a public hearing, and then also review the policy on video conferencing that we provided a draft of. So I hope that was clear, but please ask me any questions. You're not required to adopt this. It's an option if you wish to do so.
I have thank you, Nick, for that. A question about in the state law, does it prescribe who decides whether or not something qualifies as an extraordinary circumstance? Like once we were to, if we were to adopt our own policy, who then agrees that someone's circumstances indeed constitute being extraordinary?
It should be set forth as specific as possible in the law, so you set forth as a council those regulations. We put forth what we consider other factors. I think it would really be up to the chief presiding officer to determine whether that would qualify. It's not something that I think you would put forth for a vote of the council members. It would really be the chief executive officer to determine whether, or the presiding officer, I mean, whether that individual is in attendance or not.
Okay.
And for just the three first examples, disability, illness, and health concerns, would a council member, if they were absent or attending virtually, would they have to like provide a doctor's note? And if so, would they have to provide that like on public record?
Good question. No, I would think a statement from that individual that they have that concern would be sufficient.
I just want to, on the transcript issue, Nick, it says if we adopt this, a transcript of the meeting must only be provided upon request. Can somebody just say, I want a transcript of every meeting? Or is it just the meetings that somebody is invoking this?
That's right, correct. It's only those meetings which are subject to what we'll call the 103A exception. Not all meetings, just those upon which a council member attended via 103A exception.
So there would be a cost in taking our meeting and making it a transcript, a written format.
Right.
What is the purpose of that?
You can ask.
That question has been asked as to the purpose, because if it's a videotape is archived,
Yeah.
Why is the demand for a written transcript when minutes are made available, right? Required in the law to provide minutes, so why a transcript? They also have not defined transcript. Is it meant to be done by a stenographer, or can it be done by computer? Could it be handwritten? It's not being cleared. It's just a carryover from the executive order provision, which said there had to be a transcript provided.
But a video recording doesn't do the trick?
It does not count as a transcript, no.
Right.
Not even a video recording with subtitles?
Well, but then a transcript generally is something, right, that is printed and that someone can, I don't know, you wouldn't be able to print the video unless there were some way to then turn that video transcription into a written document.
Yeah, I looked it up. A written or printed version of material originally presented in another medium. It's pretty specific.
Yes, so good try, Justice.
I mean, you can export the subtitles into a Word document. It
Yeah.
just also has timestamps all over it. It's not very readable.
Okay, so this is different than I had when I heard it the first time, right? This is pretty limited. I guess I'm just trying to think through what circumstances people would take advantage. The ones that Justice mentioned, disability, illness, health, I could see someone, is not feeling well, still wants to participate. So that would say, Dan's example today would permit that going forward after June. The next one, caregiving responsibilities, kind of fits there. You could kind of see how that would work. A business trip, I get it. But for instance, vacation isn't considered extraordinary, right? Or Nick, are we allowed to define that one?
You are, and Chris and I have discussed, because you meet 48 out of the 52 weeks, I think you could define, right, as an extraordinary circumstances given other obligations and commitments between work, between family, between scheduling holidays, that maybe, given the fact that you meet so often, you could qualify that, your discretion, as a extraordinary circumstance.
My vacations are always extraordinary. Just saying.
You don't have to make the decision now, but the current ability to hold these hybrid meetings, and again, the hybrid meetings you can continue to allow for the public to attend and observe. The law only regulates the council members' attendance. June 4th is when that law expires. So that's why this is being discussed now, but you have that ability to adopt this law at any point in time.
Nick, does it preclude participation or just voting?
So, Chris, my view is as long as a majority of the council is attending in accordance with the open meetings law, it would just preclude voting, so that if you had a workshop session, you wanted to have someone participate, you can do so. They would just not be counted for quorum purposes or as being in attendance. But you can invite anyone into a conversation. It's your meeting. So they could not vote, nor would they be counted as being in attendance for purposes of establishing the quorum.
Right, so the way that applies to our MO is for a workshop, it wouldn't have an impact, but for a regular meeting, you could dial in, but your vote wouldn't count and your quorum wouldn't count toward quorum.
Correct.
Could you participate? Speak?
That's up to your discretion, because the council's discretion, because you establish how you run your meetings, but they would not be treated as a council member because they're not in attendance. So they couldn't count for attendance, but you have that ability. If you want to allow a speaker to speak on a particular topic, you could do so in your discretion.
Yeah, for instance, we could classify them as a city employee with relevant information on an issue, for instance, as the presiding officer, right?
Correct, that there's a topic being voted on that night, you wish to hear more information from this particular individual who's not being considered in attendance or counting for voting purposes, but the council is allowing that individual to be heard on the topic.
Okay.
You always have that discretion as to who you want to hear.
And what I'm hearing the downside is this issue regarding the potential added cost, right? Is that the downside I'm hearing?
Yes. And that it doesn't necessarily, I think, achieve what everyone thought it would achieve. But that's the downside, is the potential cost if someone were to request it. Right, you could be 10 meetings into this and they have to maintain these records for 5 years. So someone could, if they wanted to, could request a transcription of all meetings upon which its exemption was enacted for the last 3 years.
Is
and
that
you would
true?
have to provide it.
Is that true right now, though? No,
It
because the
is.
executive order has the exemption.
No, well, the executive order says a transcript has to be provided, but it doesn't state when. This is much clearer. This says upon request it has to be provided.
And is there a way to get clarity about what a transcript is?
I think Chris read from what the transcript is. I think the question became, was there a way to print the captions if a video was caption enabled? And I don't know the answer to that. But the definition Chris read from made clear it had to be a separate medium and had to be in writing and be able to be printed.
I do know that YouTube currently has the service that if you have closed captioning, you can take that and print it.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't know if there's a accuracy requirement.
Well, there's not in the law. I think you need to, in good faith, ensure that it is accurate. Doesn't mean line for line, word for word, but if 30% of it is gobbledygook, that would probably not be deemed to be passing in good faith. And you also just have the perception issue that even if it's only 5% not transparent, will you be will the council or city be criticized for not providing something that is clear and concise? And now we're having a debate over the quality of the transcript, potentially for 3 years' worth, if someone to make that request retroactively.
So the standard would be better than Elton John lyrics, right?
Well, you'd have to be a rocket man for that.
Yeah.
Is there any cost, Chris, too, to having recordings available for 5 years? I know on our website we don't currently offer them that far back, but I don't know if that's just because we remove them because they're deemed not as relevant, or if that's actual cost to have them. Or maybe even not on the website. I guess they could be archived somewhere if someone requested them.
I don't know the answer. I don't think it costs. I mean, we have plenty of storage. I think we don't put them on the website because there's a limited audience to go back more than a certain amount of time, and it does take up space on the website.
What do people think? I'm not hearing a ton of value. I originally thought this would be cool, but the parameters don't look that interesting.
I think it's a value for cases like the example of tonight, where we do have a person who's not able to join in person. So I think that's its main value. I'm also cognizant of the additional steps that it might mean we have to be able to take. So I don't know if it's possible to get costing of services, and both the cost of the money we pay, but also the staff time as well. To just make sure that if we did want to go this, the benefit for those of us who attend city council and might want to take advantage of this, it could put an extra burden on the staff. So would want to know a little more about that.
And one other point I did not mention is that this law, the state law, is deemed repealed as of July 1st, 2024. So in essence, this is what's called a 2-year law. May be further extended, but as written, it expires in 2 years.
Lee and George, what's your experience been, having been on the council for so many years, of, status quo?
I mean, I think it's always good to have as many voices on the council as possible speak at a council, but on the other hand, there's never been an issue of a quorum. There's never been an issue of a lack of voices. So occasionally someone is sick. So I don't think it would have a significant impact on the way we've done things in the past.
Yeah, I'm probably the person that has had the most business travel, over the years on council. And, it obviously would be nice to be able to call in. I try really hard not to do my traveling on Mondays. But occasionally I ended up having to miss something. Yeah, I mean, let me ask it a different way. If we were able to say that the added cost burden is minimal, then would we want to do it?
Yeah.
Seems
Right.
like penny foolish, pound wise, kind of.
Yeah. So maybe that would be the next step, is to let's explore how easy or hard it is, and then that would help us gauge what to do.
And just to clarify one more time, the transcript could only be requested for a meeting where a council member did attend virtually, correct?
That is correct. It does not require the transcripts in every meeting, only one where at least one council member used that 103A exemption.
So we can do some research on what the cost of that is.
I'd also like to understand what the potential cost is of extending this to committees. I do appreciate the accessibility aspect of being able to do these hybrid meetings, and I of course understand that there is people power and money involved in that, but I especially feel that after we hear our presentation about committees today, I expect that it will be even clearer to me that we want those meetings to be as accessible for participants and attendees as possible.
I would leave this to Ben's presentation, but I don't believe there's more than one committee that does a hybrid meeting.
But it might be because it's hard to.
Well, let's pick that up at that. I mean, we're going to pick that up shortly, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so what we said the next step was let's get a sense of how easy or hard is it to have a transcript available. If we can solve that, I think people said, it's probably an incremental plus as long as the cost is not overwhelming that. Is that what I heard?
Yeah. And also the 5-year requirement, though, again, as Chris mentioned, that might not be relevant at all. That might be fairly, you just don't take them down as soon as we currently do, so.
Pete can answer that if you want an answer on, he did offer to come in and.
Oh, is he here?
Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
All right. The man behind the curtain, or one of the people behind the curtain.
Let me line him up.
Hello, yes. Excuse me, are you asking me a question? I was getting my materials ready for my presentation.
No, we're trying to get Pete to come in.
The other guy behind, the other
Pete.
person behind the curtain.
I will tell Pete. One moment.
I just sent him a text.
He's listening to music,
And I will confirm this, but I believe the requirement is that they be archived or made available for 5 years, but not that you need to have them up on your website, but I will confirm that.
Yeah, the language right now seems to indicate on website, but I could be reading that a certain way.
Oh, no.
My son was on the phone.
Oh, it's okay. Can you field that question?
What was the question? I didn't even.
I just had a question. We think that the current draft, and this might come from the state law requirement, is that if we were to continue to do hybrid meetings, that we would have to have the meetings that are hybrid available on our website or on a public website for 5 years. And right now, I think it's 2 years, maybe 3, and I didn't know if adding a couple extra years would be
We had held it, I mean, when Nick and I went through this pre-pandemic, I believe, Nick can correct me, we technically only had to hold the video for 6 to 7 months because we always had the minutes. Right. And then after the fact, back in the day, I would drop off DVDs, so Ola's got a closet full of DVDs that go back to God knows when, so if there was a request, she could make a copy. My understanding was they were never free to the public. Whatever $15, $20 charge had to be, there had to be a charge to foil a copy of it. Post-pandemic, we still have everything backed up, and we were leaving 3 years at a time. Now with YouTube has a little bit bigger storage capacity, and I don't know if I had mentioned when I gave my spiel a couple months ago, when I started in Hyde Park, they actually have their YouTube meetings go back to 2013. They're still there. So YouTube doesn't dump like Vimeo used to. So we do have the meetings. I mean, if there need be, I have 2 years worth on a hard drive. There's a closet full of meetings if anything needed to be viewed. But you're saying actively?
Nick, I don't know if you have a reading on this right now, but if you, that section on that 6A or B6 about they should be linked on a public website and then shall remain so available for a minimum of 5 years thereafter.
Right. Then that would be active, right? That would require that they be actively maintained for 5 years.
But it sounds like that is possible on YouTube, is what you're saying. Just change our approach.
From my experience, YouTube will hold, like I said, in Hyde Park, I've got almost 9 years of meetings that are on their YouTube site. So that would be there.
And
the other thing is right now on the old section, before we changed to YouTube a few months ago, we still have 3 years there on the Vimeo link for the city page. Mm-hmm. So right now we have 3.5 years that somebody could access if need be. And if they needed something before that, we have that in storage over here, and I have it in storage on the hard drive at my house. So we have it.
And is there any additional cost to having more videos on YouTube?
Everything's on there.
So we wouldn't pay any more for having more.
No, because
stuff.
it's not an account that you're making any money off of, which is why there's no commercials, which is a nice thing.
Okay,
so there's nothing with that. But yeah, everything that goes on is on in date order. Zoning, planning, whatever else, meetings go on.
So that sounds like the question is the transcript issue.
Right, it sounds like the videos is not a
Yeah,
monetary
that's a
issue.
gray area
Yep.
with me and the other municipalities as well, because like Paloma had said, you can click a couple things and you can get a transcript on YouTube, but is that okay if there's misspellings? Does it fit the bill that Nick was talking about? I don't know the answer to that. I did try to produce it one time for Hyde Park Planning. Just to give you an idea, it was a 2-hour meeting. They used a transcribing service, megabucks. Like I'm talking $1.50, $1.75 per page. It's quite a bit. So what we did is we tried to do what Paloma had said, try to turn it into a Word document. And one 2-hour planning board meeting was something like 105 pages of how it worked out text-wise. I mean, you could probably shrink that yourself, but that's just doing a straight old copy and paste off of YouTube onto a Word document. But I don't know what the accuracy, if that would legally work. I have no idea.
Right, the law doesn't give us really any guidance there.
Yeah.
And invariably, there would be some difficulties in translation. Some people speak softly, some people, the words get mumbled and it doesn't get heard clearly. So there will be quality issues. I think you have to go into that expecting that. And then it becomes a matter of how important are those quality issues and how far is that issue going to be advanced by someone.
Yeah.
And typically, transcripts also identify the speaker,
Yes.
so that's a challenge here,
Yes.
too.
So you'd have to, like I said, it was challenging when I was trying to do it for Hyde Park, just for the planning, until they came back to live. And it would still mean me sending them the video in a specific format, this one company that they were using out in California, and they would transcribe it page by page. But again, the planning board secretary had to go over top of that for just what you said. Who was that person that's speaking? Because they're not looking at nameplates when they're transcribing it. So you actually have to hate to tell you, there's another step. Somebody would have to put the person's name.
Or each speaker would have to identify himself.
Every time they open their mouth, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And that would be the biggest criticism, I think, of a transcript, is that how do you know what comment was attributable to which person if the speaker is not identified?
Mm-hmm. And during the pandemic, it was worse because everybody had a mask on, so you didn't know who was talking. So that threw another wrench into it. So with all the other municipalities that I work in, I don't get a clear answer. So like Nick is saying, they're saying this, but will this work? Will this not work? I don't know. But the simple question about yours, Mal, yes, we have the videos, can always be watched. Not a problem. Anybody else?
No, thank you so
Okay.
much for
Thank
coming.
you.
Yep.
Thank you.
So I think it gives you a sense of the range, though, that the worst-case scenario is you have to get it professionally transcribed, where someone will listen to the video, type down each speaker's name, and then certify as to the accuracy. And that's going to be a stenographer on a per-page count. And then the far other side of the spectrum is you just hit the button on Zoom or YouTube, and it prints out a transcript that is not specific to identifying speakers.
Pete,
And the difficulty could... Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Pete mentioned that he used to charge a fee for copies of DVDs. Would it be lawful to charge a fee for a transcript?
I would argue that under the way this law is being drafted, no, it needs to be made available upon request. It did not set forth subject to a fee. There are other statutes where they clearly set forth that they intend a fee or not. So in this case, it would be at the city's expense.
Got it.
And the difficulty here is that someone could, at the end of a 2-year period, go back and request for all the other meetings. And we can't question why they're asking it. That's not appropriate. If they ask for it, it has to be provided.
Let me understand that last comment. It's not only the meetings where one of us is remote, but...
No, it is only the meetings where you are remote under 103A.
Oh,
But someone could come in and make a general request 2 years from now for the 8 meetings in the past 2 years where that provision was used.
got it. Okay, that helps.
If I could just weigh in, it doesn't sound to me like there's a whole lot of risk in this because, first of all, you know, how many meetings do we have somebody that's out like I am today? If anybody wants to know what happened in that meeting, they're most likely to go and find the video. I think it'll be a very obscure circumstance where somebody is aware of this law and is like requesting transcripts to be disruptive in some way or causing expense in some way. I just don't think it's very likely that this law or this provision would be used by anybody.
It seems like we can also, since we're aware of the cost, could be judicious in how we actually make use of this law, and I guess minimize the number of times we actually make use of the law in a year.
Well, the individual, once you adopt the law, the council members then have the right to, you're right, it would be self-imposed, though. You would each have to decide who's using it. But once the law is enacted, any council member has the right to avail themselves of that.
Sure, that's true.
Well, what's the council consensus? We want to do something moving forward? Do we want to learn something? Where are we at?
I think, Chris, is it possible to look into the cost of transcription services just to get a ballpark of how much this could cost?
Yes.
Great. I think that is a next step then. And then I think, Nick, it's possible we could, I know that someone might in the future request a transcript, so this wouldn't necessarily answer the question of how much it ends up costing us, but we could pass this law, try it for a period of time, and then for whatever reason rescind it as a council if we wanted to.
That's right. Majority of the council could repeal the law.
There's a cost every time you pass a law or rescind a law also. So
Okay.
I don't know if you're aware of
Public
that.
hearing notification, New York State, the E-codes, your
Right.
codifier, there's a cost there as well.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not suggesting as a cavalier thing. I think something just wanting to know what our options are is it's something new that we're exploring, so. Just making sure we're not committing ourselves to this if it turns out to not fit
It
us.
is, yep, not irreversible.
And is there a time sensitivity to us passing this or ignoring or tabling this for now?
The only time sensitivity is that your ability to hold these virtual meetings expires under a state law on, I believe it's June 8th. So that first week in June. So you'd have to hold a public hearing and adopt the law before that expires. And it's June 8th.
Please clarify, would you have to pass it by June 8th? Or if you want it to continue without disruption, you would have to do it by June 8th? Can they pass?
You can pass it, thank you, Chris, yes. You can pass it at any point after June 8th up until July of 2024. For it to continue without disruption, you would need to pass and have it filed with the Secretary of State by June 8th for that law to become effective.
And I would just remind you, some of the people that we do have come in and publicly comment, listen to the meetings. They're going to know they have the ability to do this. And if you don't think some of them are going to ask for a transcript, I'm probably reading this very differently than you are. But you've got one person who comes in and comments all the time that I'm sure would use this as a tool.
Others? What do we want to do?
I think I'd like to wait until we get just a number for the
Right.
transcript.
So we have some time, right? So we want to put it off and see what we learn in 2 weeks? Is that all right?
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So next one, this will be an interesting one. So this is about the community investment program. I know that we asked for input from council and that was collated and that we have that listing here, but there's also an email from Nick, and I think we should just hear what he has to say first, because it may affect what we do, right?
Right, so I apologize for the late notice and for not raising this before, and I was looking for some clarity in the documents I have. I don't see it, so I think I need just to speak to Mark. The concern I want to do is make sure that before you take any action on this, that we have ensured that this is within your authority in the sense that it's not a gift of public funds, that it's serving a municipal purpose. Right, you can't go out and use public funds and give someone a truck. If you're hosting a community event, you're co-sponsoring it, or you're providing equipment that is used and there's a public purpose and benefit to it, I think there are ways to get that approved. I just need to get some more details to ensure that it meets the law. There's a constitutional provision that says public funds can only be used for a public purpose and it can't be given to private organizations. Clearly that happens. There are grants, there are programs where it's done. There's a very fine line. The controller has defined opinions that they've issued that says when it's permissible, when it's not permissible. I just need to dig into this a bit more and make sure I have an understanding so I can give you that guidance and give you our legal opinion that the uses either fall within your authority or without, and why they're without, or how they might be able to be brought in if there were some changes in either in the city's oversight or involvement with those funds, or in how those funds are being used or being requested. And we can get that done for your next workshop.
Okay. And it sounds like, Nick, you're saying that it may vary by proposal as well.
Absolutely. It's very fact-specific, Mayor, yes. And it turns on us having a very good understanding of those proposals. Some will be clear right off the bat. Many, I suspect, will just need a little bit of tweak to get some more information.
Okay. Well, I think the good thing is that we'll go through it now. You'll give us an opinion, and it may also form sort of a way for us to understand how to do this going forward as well, right? In terms of, what do we have to make sure is in there if it's going to work right? Yeah, and I get the issue. I guess I just hadn't thought about it carefully. Okay. Council, questions or anything on this?
So wait, are you suggesting that we go through this now anyway and then wait again to hear Nick's feedback, or do we want to pause on this and then come back with Nick's feedback and continue the discussion then?
I think, and it's up to council, I think we'd wait because let's say it comes back and says, 5 are fine and 3 are not. We might want to rejigger what we do, right?
Wait,
Yeah. Yeah. I'm totally fine waiting to hear.
Okay. I will say I looked at the packet and it looked fine, but I'm willing to wait to see what they say, what our legal counsel advises. Other thoughts?
My one concern is that some of these are time-based, but I also don't really think there's anything for it, and it's not, we have to do this due diligence, so
Okay.
it is what it is.
And it would be a 3-week wait, is that correct? Because we're skipping 2 weeks from now, is that right?
The next workshop is on the 31st.
Okay, thank you.
Everybody okay? Yep. On the 24th, we're not going to see each other on the Monday?
23rd.
Oh, right.
It's the 23rd, and then the following Monday is a holiday, so
Got
we're...
it.
That's right, I'm making big plans.
I mean, I can come. If people want to come, we'll have like pizza or something.
You're supposed to take us bowling.
Okay, I'm there. Cool. Okay.
Thank you for getting that going.
Yeah, and I'm sorry about that, but Nick, I appreciate you raising your hand. Whether it's the 11th hour or not, it's still the right thing to do, so thank you.
Yeah, no, I just want to
Thank you.
say too, I think it's better that we know before we say like, yes, we're going to award this money to these people, and then all of a sudden, oh no, we can't award this money to these people.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you.
Yep. Okay. The next one is our committees. We want to go through kind of, what are our committees, what do they do, and what are the openings so that we all know available slots. And Ben, are you going to do this?
Yeah, Ben's going to present.
Yes, Mayor, I'll be right out.
Okay. He's pulling the curtain now. It's a long curtain. There's actually a dog pulling the curtain. Yeah.
I think this is Ben's inaugural presentation, too, so. All right.
Cool. Thank you, sir.
And I just want to thank Ben for all the time he put into this. I wouldn't have had the bandwidth to do this, and really appreciate how thoughtful he was in preparing it.
I like all the pictures, the graphics you chose for each of them, too, to bring them to life.
Thank you. All right, hello, Council. Thank you for having me out here today. I've been listening to all your meetings, obviously from behind the scenes, but it's fun to be out here in front of you as well. And so basically the context for this item is that a number of you throughout the past few months have wanted to kind of get your bearings on where we're at with the various councils or committees and boards that the city has. And so the last couple of weeks, I've reached out to a lot of the chairs in order to figure out who's currently on each committee and board, what vacancies there may be, and then did a little more background research just to try and answer any questions that you might have around the committees and boards. The website's a little bit out of date, so a lot of this is coming from the chairs themselves rather than the websites. So with that, we'll just get right into it. Feel free to jump in with questions or comments as we go. The first two are our planning and zoning boards. And both of these are actually fully at capacity right now in terms of membership. As for the planning board, what the object of this board is to make recommendations to you and the mayor about matters about development in the city. They're consulted on comprehensive planning and implementation of comprehensive plans. And they're currently having a 7-member structure under the city code, and they are appointed by the mayor with the consent of all of you and serve 3-year terms. We also staff these meetings with a number of city staff and consultants. We have Amanda Caputo, our municipal secretary, who sits in on all of these meetings. We have an attorney from Keenan Bean at each of these meetings. We have our city planner, John Clark, at all of these meetings, and we also have our city engineer, John Russo, at all the planning board meetings. And basically, this is a responsive board. They review applications and permits, and they are responding to what materials they are submitted. And the meeting information is indicated on the slide. The next board that we have is...
And so they're fully in person. They don't do a hybrid meeting.
The planning board.
Yes.
Yeah.
Both.
And then if...
And ZBA.
Yep.
Yeah, just to back up on planning board, so not in the requirements, but my habit is to look for expertise. It doesn't mean that everyone needs to have expertise, but the chair has also co-chaired our master plan in 2017 and in 2007 as an architect. There are several other architects or landscape architects on there, and some normal people too, but you know, there's I tend to want some expertise, right? Normal people? Yeah.
Okay.
All right. You know, architects are weird. We know that. So.
Any other questions or concerns on planning board before I move on to zoning?
I don't know whether I'm going to bring this up at the beginning. We had some interest in seeing resumes of all of our committee members. I know that since we've started this term, resumes have been included in all applicants and appointments, but I would be interested in sort of going back and getting a comprehensive record of everybody and a little bit of information on them. And I don't know if it's necessarily a resume, maybe it's just a short bio, but information about all of our members of all of our committees.
Right. This was brought up at the community quarterly meeting by a community member who was concerned that members who are on a lot of these committees who are appointed before a certain date, to my understanding, there's no public record of their resumes, redacted resumes on file. So my understanding is that you're asking if we could go back to any members that we don't have a resume on file and we could reach out to them?
Yeah, and request background.
We talk about a lot of little things, and these all are starting to add up. Like, we're really struggling just to get Main Street paved and keep up with the projects we have going out. I don't have 5 extra bends in the back to do this stuff. I mean, this was a lot of work. So every time you ask a question like that, it's just, well, we'll just do this and we'll just do that. And I'm sorry, we don't have the capacity to take on every little thing that you're going to have to prioritize these. So I would ask you to put all these little things on a list and then vote on them as a policy, because I might need more money and I might need more staff to do all these little things. I mean, we have the city to run every day, and I just can't keep going back and let's chase 40 people for resumes. I'm just not going to say yes to that. I have to be able to run the city. And I need Ben to actually have time to work on projects.
But to that point, we do request that for all of our current appointees.
Going forward,
yes,
right.
And since I've been on working for the city, that has been the case. I don't know at what point that changed. I couldn't speak to that.
Yeah, the one we might be able to do is those that have been appointed in the last couple of years, we may still have the material. So if you could check on your laptop or your computer and see if we still have some. So that might fill in some of the blanks.
Yeah, I mean, Colin did keep a lot of records, and I can look through what extent he might have things that were not included in packet. That I can look into, but I would defer to Chris on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was really hard to just, we have committees that wouldn't respond to Ben, and he'll go through that, but like, this wasn't easy. He had to email some of these folks 3 or 4 times, and we still didn't get a response, for instance, from the HRC. So.
All right, I'll keep moving and then again, jump in as we go. The next is the zoning board. This board, its primary goal and mission is to hear and determine appeals from administrative decisions, petitions for vacancies and other related matters. They meet more on demand rather than necessarily every month. They have a 5-member structure and they are also at capacity right now. And these members serve a 3-year term as well. We also staff these meetings with Amanda Caputo, Akina being an attorney, and then also our planner, Dave Buckley, sits in on these meetings.
Our planner or Dave Buckley?
Our building inspector.
Thank you.
My mistake.
Yeah, and on this one, especially because we had some issues with training. We've done a lot of training with this group. We continue to do training, and got a little bit of a focus of wanting to have at least a lawyer on the group. Just keep them on the reservation. So, because the Zoning Board of Appeals, just so you know, basically says if they approve something, people don't have to follow the law. That's what is meant by getting a variance, is that we've established the law a certain way, but the state allows for a relief valve, which sometimes is really appropriate, but you just got to train people really well so they understand the criteria for providing relief from zoning.
Right. I'll keep moving, but we can always backtrack if we need to. The next is the Board of Assessment Review. This is actually pretty timely based on the mayor's comments earlier tonight. This is also a 5-member board. This is not coming from the city code necessarily. It's actually under New York State real property law. Must have 3 to 5 members. We're currently at 5, so there's no vacancies on this either. This involves some more strict requirements on who can be on it. There's certain background requirements, a lot of mandatory training, things like that. Members serve a 5-year term, and this is also staffed by the city, specifically by our assessor, Kathy Martin. And they meet once a year, and at which point, and that will be coming up, at which point they will set a couple post-grievance meetings with TBD times and locations and such. But they are also responsive. They're responding to complaints in relation to the assessments as they're sent out.
Right, so the only thing I'd add on this one is, again, the assessments just went out. There's what's called a grievance process. If someone says, I want to grieve my assessment, that means I'd like someone to review it. This is the group that decides that. In fact, it's not the assessor that decides, it's the Board of Assessment Review. So here the expertise that you're looking for is some understanding of real estate and some understanding of how assessments work. And it's not the most popular group, but it's a pretty important one. Since we went to full value assessing 20 years ago, we get very, very few grievances. In communities that aren't at full value, you get a ton more. But once you kind of get there and stay close, the numbers are pretty low. So.
Okay, we'll keep moving. We're on to our Conservation Advisory Committee. This is up to 9 members on this committee. We have 7 right now, which means we have 2 vacancies. I was also told by our chair that we could expect 1 more to be opening up in June. There's a member who's expected to step down. They meet the first Tuesday of every month in person in the courtroom. I believe they have sometimes done hybrid meetings, but not always. I think it's more meeting to meeting. They're currently doing a lot of different things. You've heard about some of these initiatives from the chair himself. You've also heard about some things just through Chris and I, but these members serve 2-year terms, and basically they are charged with advising the council on all things climate, natural resources, and environment. And most recently, the compost working group, which is a subset of the CAC, we watched one of their videos in a meeting, and they've been putting up drop sites throughout the city.
And
go ahead.
There's statutory requirements on conservation advisory committees. In fact, I think all of the ones so far have something at state law that guides them, and CAC has kind of areas for them to work on under state law, if I've got that right.
Yeah, I mean, even under the code, there's specifically enumerated things that they are charged with. I didn't want to get into that too much, but I can give you the code section if you're interested in looking it up yourself.
Yeah, and that code comes from the state enabling legislation.
Right.
Okay.
And I want to just note that this is somewhat staffed, or at least liaison, with our Climate Smart coordinator.
Absolutely.
Faye Leone.
Yes, and she meets with Chris and/or I every week just to have updates on everything climate. The next is the Traffic and Safety Planning Committee. A number of you have attended these meetings in person. This is a 5-member committee under the code, staffed by 2 appointees, but then actually, unlike some of the other committees before, it has a mandated member of the police department, a mandated superintendent of streets position, and a mandated representative of the planning board on the committee. This is also a responsive committee. They basically I compile an agenda based on community concerns and complaints through the weeks leading up to each meeting, and they go through and make recommendations to you about any action that would need to be codified, or they also have the power just to put up signs and things like that based on their own recommendations if it's already in the code. This is in person every Thursday, every 4th Thursday of the month, downstairs in what we call the classroom, but it's a meeting room in the lower level of City Hall. There's no vacancies right now.
Yeah, so this is the one I would ask Nick. I don't think this one is mandated by state law. What state law does is establish how you can do things like put up stop signs or speed limits, and they have to follow that, so they have to understand it. But I think we created this committee as a way of freeing our time up on council.
That's correct. I believe there's a provision, New York State General Municipal Law, that allows a city to have a traffic safety committee, but it's not statutorily required, and it's governed by your local city code.
Right, but this is the group that understands, okay, what evidence do I have to put in a stop sign or reduce the speed limit, and they know how to go about it, which is really good.
Yep.
That's correct. There are specific standards. You just can't put up a stop sign. You need to make sure the safe stopping distance, there are sight lines appropriate. The vehicle and traffic law has certain provisions, but it's the New York State traffic manual that needs to be consulted. Yeah, a lot goes into it.
And the last thing I wanted to mention for this is it is also staffed by city staff, myself being one of the members. I don't vote on anything, but I do take minutes, put together agendas, coordinate all of that. But as I mentioned before, we have a couple members of the city staff that are actually members of the committee as well.
I do have a quick question about this, or just, I guess, traffic and safety in general. If a constituent reaches out to one of us as a city council person about something that has to do with traffic and safety, would we then pass that on to the committee? Would we pass that on to Chris? Would we pass that on to you, Ben?
That's a good question. And actually, a couple of your colleagues on the council have already been doing this. The proper procedure would be to send it to me. I put together the agendas. As long as it's before a week before the meeting, I will include it in the agenda, and they will discuss, and I will include minutes on that, usually the week following every meeting.
Fantastic.
And when they come in to me, I route them to the traffic safety board as well. So whoever you send them to, they'll end up here.
May I ask a question? With regards to how can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
With regards to this committee, thanks. So when this committee receives a request, so for example, let's say I go to the committee and I said, hey, we need a stop sign on the corner of this intersection. When the committee receives that, in the law that they're following or in their own bylaws, like what are they doing with the request? Are they considering whether or not it needs a stop sign, which is the specific request, or are they saying, what is going on this intersection? Here's some alternatives to stop signs. Because I'm never really clear, like I just had to send a follow-up question about an intersection because I don't know from the minutes what the discussion actually looked like.
Right, so it's kind of both, Dan. So, a number of these members are very experienced members, not only of the traffic and safety, but also have lived in Beacon for a long time. So what they'll do often is they'll consider the request specifically. So in your example, a stop sign, they might say, okay, what would a stop sign like this look like at this intersection? And might be, this is just hypothetical, they might say, well, there's a traffic light 2 blocks down, and maybe in this case, we don't want to put a stop sign there, but maybe we want to put like a more obvious crossing markings, things like that, something else to help with the safety issue. So it's going to be both. They'll consider the specific request, but they might also discuss alternatives. So I don't remember the discussion around your suggestion specifically offhand, but hypothetically, they would probably go through both.
I see. Because, there are, for example, I was actually discussing this with one of the members of the committee recently, is when we talk about, okay, there's this intersection, people are speeding through it, what are the options? We can do a stop sign, we can do a painted crosswalk, but I have a book that has like 120 different things you can do to manage traffic, from, creating little islands and woo nerfs and all these other little features, but is this committee empowered to suggest courses of action that might cost a little more than a stop sign?
My experience is they can make whatever recommendations they would see fit. I do believe at least a couple of the members have read books. I don't know if it's the same book as you, but they've mentioned having read, these like pedestrian safety sorts of oriented books. So I do think that they do feel empowered to do that. Whether or not they decide ultimately that that's what they want to do, I think having several members of city staff on the committee helps keep realistic goals in the forefront of discussions as well. And I know Molly, Justice, and Ren have all attended meetings. If any of you want to jump in, you're more than welcome.
They're very thorough. I loved the meeting that I attended. They went through every concern and addressed it, and there were a lot of ideas put on the table. Each one was treated with care. So, yeah, I really enjoyed being there.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. That committee's a well-oiled machine.
The one thing, actually, one of the meetings that I attended, where they were discussing one of the busy roads, and because the resident had brought up an intersection where they were having some issues, and they actually ended up with an interesting discussion about whether they should think about a longer stretch of that road holistically. And I got the sense, and Ben, I'd be curious, this might be something to take up with them and maybe not, about they weren't sure if that was kind of beyond their remit, about responding to like individual requests that come in, but thinking more holistically about roads. And so we might, I know there are various ways that roads and kind of the more full version of that, not just cars, but also pedestrians and bikes, as we start to think about that as a city, if they have a role to play, what role we want them to play, what role they think they could bring into it, because as Ben said, they have a lot of expertise in this field. So I would say right now, there's less of that going on of the committee. There's a study of Verplank that they're looking into that I guess got put on pause because of the pandemic, so there might be some specific things. I think that's actually being done not by them, maybe the county or the state,
correct.
the county. So there might be opportunities if we, as a council, want to get more involved in more holistic looking at roads, they could play a part, but my impression is that's not their focus right now. Is that your understanding too, Ben?
I would say that's fair. I think that they want to, their goal is to be as responsive to individual complaints as possible, rather than taking like a master plan approach to the city, which I think that they would see as being more the city administrator's office purview.
Yeah, like we're talking about a possible bike master plan, and we're exploring that with an entity that might have a grant to do it. And that would be well beyond the scope of that committee.
Yeah.
But I'm sure at some point a draft would come to them and we'd get their input on it.
Right. Yeah, a bit like how there are other committees, like the planning board, that I've seen them put inputs onto other
Right.
things we've suggested.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's a dividing line, and you're kind of hearing examples. Like, I was just trying to think, I used to want us to take down a traffic light if we were going to add a traffic light. No one ever listened to me, but that's okay. But we could, for instance, ask them to do a couple of things, like look at our traffic lights, for instance. I think that would probably be within scope, but a bike system would probably be in the planner's scope, right? Something like that.
Yeah, or like the county did an assessment of how to reconfigure Beekman Street. That's kind of beyond where they would go.
Yeah.
Right. And I
Cool.
think another example is sidewalks come up at time to time, but it's complicated because a lot of areas of the city don't have sidewalks, and it involves a lot more involved processes. So that would probably be something that they would say, this is a city policy decision. This isn't something that we would make a recommendation on.
I will throw in there, though, that this committee is aware of sidewalks, and or at least in the meeting that I attended, that's something, pedestrian traffic is something that they do consider and keep it heavily in mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to keep chugging along. I know this is taking a fair amount of time, and we still have
Before you head on,
oh, go ahead.
Dan, does that answer your question that you raised? Or provide some more
I believe-
context?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Sorry, Ben.
And you can also connect with me offline, Dan, if you want to talk about it more. Moving on to the Commission on Human Rights. This is a 5 to 15 member commission. Right now we have 5 according to the year-end report as of last year. This is one of the committees that I hadn't made a connection with as of yet, so this might be slightly out of date. I tried to get as current as possible. The website's out of date, so I'm hopefully going to get this updated with at least the information I have here. They meet the 3rd Wednesday of each month, right now fully on Zoom, not hybrid as far as I know. And they do have a public comment period, and I'm happy to follow up on this more later with more follow-up. But as of now, this is the membership that I'm aware of. We have up to 10 vacancies. I don't know what the standard operating level of membership is, but we are technically within the statute right now, the code right now, with 5. And the next one is the Tree Advisory Committee. You've heard a little bit from them recently. They were charged with helping with the Arbor Day celebration a couple weeks back. Currently at 4 members. We just recently appointed Kate Stryker. We have 1 vacancy on this board, and they are currently meeting on the 2nd Wednesday of each month downstairs in the classroom. And they are currently working on a nursery pilot program with Mark Price, and they are starting to meet more regularly. For a while, they were not meeting super regularly. The requirements for the terms are they do a 2-year term, 1 member has to be from the CAC, and 1 must be an arborist. That's our tree committee.
And who's our arborist?
I'm actually not sure. I would imagine
Paul
it.
Markwalder.
He's the chair. I figured as much. But
He's the arborist.
Okay. And Pete Bailey is the secretary. He's the one who has come in a couple times and spoke to you during public comment about their events.
I'm sorry, did you say that one of their members had to be from the CAC?
Yes. And I do not believe that is currently happening right now, so to the extent that they wanted to have another addition added, then it probably would be appropriate to look at the CAC. Next is our Board of Ethics. I also had a little issue getting in touch with Board of Ethics, so this is all with an asterisk as well. Could be a little bit out of date. My information is that we have four members currently. This is a 5-member committee, and they serve 5-year terms. They meet quarterly, but I believe they're only mandated to meet once a year. So my latest information is they're meeting quarterly via Zoom, but that's more than they would be required under the code, and they appoint, or elect rather, their own chair.
Right, and this is the state statute here makes this kind of a responsive committee, right? If no one files an ethics concern or question, there isn't much to do. Is that right?
Correct.
That's how I understand it.
Yep. They do, their goals and mission include like just overseeing the city code of ethics, basically. They have some education things that they can do, but a lot of it, I believe, is responding to issues of with ethics code. So next is our Greenway Trail Committee. It's a pretty self-explanatory name for the committee. They are charged with, looking at the Greenway Trail, making recommendations, and being involved with that. Right now, they have 8 members. It's an ad hoc committee, so it's not in the code. There's no cap on membership, but right now they're not like missing any per se. The chair did tell me they do have a preset agenda for each meeting. It's a more of an informal structure, or informal discussion structure, and they're currently trying to meet quarterly. In the past, they've been meeting less frequently, and they try and meet outside, weather permitting.
So in this group, they're working obviously on our Greenway Trail. I think the focus is 3 pieces. So there's a section of the trail from Main Street up to Bridge Street that they're looking at. If at the time comes that we get the rail line for a trail purpose, they'll look at that. They've been looking at a section north of the train station to head out. Remember, there's the Clara Sauer Trail that goes from the train station south to Dennings Point and connects to Madam Brett. So they're looking at the section north, and that's getting pieces of it are getting ready. And then I've also asked them to look at a loop on the southeast side of the creek from where the Tyranda Bridge is up to 9D. And that would be new. It requires, property owners to be interested. Obviously, we're hoping that the Craig House property, which is more than half that route, would be interested. So that's what we're asking them to look at. Okay.
All right. Next committee is the Main Street Access Committee. You've heard from John Clark about a recent report that they put together. They have 11 members currently. It's another ad hoc committee, meaning they don't have a capped or minimum membership that I'm aware of. So therefore, I'm saying no vacancies, but of course it's similar to the last, where that's with an asterisk. Technically, there could probably be more members. John Clark does assist with a lot of their work, our city planner. And they are meeting every month via Zoom. And their goal is basically to develop a holistic and sustainable action plan for Main Street parking, traffic, public transit, pedestrian and non-vehicular use for residents and visitors. And I put an example of their current work, but we don't need to dive into that too much. They do have a preset agenda, though, similar to what we do.
Are there meetings open to the public? Like, could anybody attend?
I believe all the committee meetings are open to the public. So yes, to the extent that some of these committees meetings are not on the website calendar, it's more a reflection on needing to be updated. So I'm more than happy to put all of their meetings onto the website so that anyone has access to the Zoom links or knows when and where they're meeting. This has been a good process actually in like kind of building connections with a lot of these committees, and I'm optimistic that that's going to happen with the ones I haven't heard from yet. I understand people are busy, so when that happens, they will also be reflected on the website.
I'm glad there was some benefit to this other than just our education.
Yeah, and the website in a lot of these committees is more out of date than I'd like to see. So hopefully, all the committees that are active and functioning will have accurate information on the website.
Yeah, this really gives the excuse to go through the website and see what is out of date.
Right, and this was an ad hoc committee. I called it, I think, my first month in office, and I think they've done some amazing stuff.
Yeah.
So they've had a lot of support from the planner.
All right, so we also have a third ad hoc committee, the Police Advisory Committee. We have 10 members on this right now. And again, not to belabor it, but there's not a set membership on this. We do have I believe the goal when making this committee was to have a pretty representative basis of community organizations. The co-chairs, one of which is a pastor at Faith Temple Church, and the other is a political science and criminal justice professor at CUNY. This is, I believe, began in 2021, and they do meet monthly here in the courtroom, and we do staff these with either or Police Chief Frost or Lieutenant Figlia, and they come and help answer questions or discuss things with the committee.
And
Right.
they've done interviews with our social worker, Lashavius Dicker, as well.
Right.
Is there a report from, I guess, any of these committees, but particularly this committee, that we should expect at some point?
Report like a yearly year-end report?
Yeah, a yearly year-end report, or, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, we were hoping to get a readout from the Police Advisory Committee sometime mid-year.
Yep.
I just think we need to meet with them and make sure they're okay and kind of on track. In my emails, I think they're on track to do some things, but I think they also might need to be nudged a little. I had Terry Nelson put on there at the start of the year, and I just do want to check in, right? Because I'm kind of hoping we get some sort of readout. I think people are discovering that because we're accredited and we're one of the few police departments that are state accredited, that kind of a lot of the boxes get checked quickly. But that doesn't mean they should be telling us that, as opposed to kind of discovering it for themselves. So, but yeah, I think we should check up and see where they're at. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I know that is on our radar. As for the committees more generally, I think it's more committee to committee, how they're doing minutes, how they're doing reporting. But I think this is, again, a good opportunity of evolving more regular contact with the chairs. And so to the extent that they have minutes and reports, I'm happy to make sure that those get on the website as well. I know the tree committee, I wasn't in contact with them for a long time. But now with Pete Bailey, I have to give credit to him as secretary. He's been very responsive, and including getting minutes on the website. So, it's an evolving process, but that's definitely the goal, to the extent that these things are being made, that the people in the community do have access to them. Okay, and then for our last, I will say, quote-unquote, active committee is the Recreation Committee. As many of you know, we've had discussions before. This is a committee that's technically active, but not really at the moment. It's in the process of being reconceptualized, largely under the guidance of Mark Price, our Recreation Director, who's hoping to turn this from a committee that for a while was had meetings, but people wouldn't show up, didn't really have much to do. He's looking to maybe broaden it to include art and culture, and that will remain to be seen. But I think what he's thinking right now is that by the end of this rec study that's being done by a consulting group this year, he's hoping by the end of the year we're going to have a good idea of what needs there are that this committee could fill. And so this will be another thing that we'll probably be bringing back to you specifically to talk about what this new committee is going to look like. And Mark Price will probably be the one talking to you about that rather than me.
And your first reporting on that study will come back to you the first week of June. So June 6th, they'll be bringing to you the inventory of programs and facilities, and also a draft public outreach program for your feedback before they jump into that public feedback process.
Would they be looking for committee members to help with the public feedback process, or that's not that's why we have a consultant, that they would be doing
So
all that work.
on the study, Mark is trying to work with what we've termed ambassadors, finding kind of a concentric circles and getting people who can get the information out to people and get diverse voices in reaction to that. So he's trying to think of people that reach into all age groups, all demographics, not just people that we know are always tuned in. And some of those may be parlayed into longer-term members.
Exactly. And Mark sees this as a way of, we're going to find out maybe who some great members would be in this process of building networks for the study and having ambassadors. So I think he sees this study as a way to help us
revitalize.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great presentation. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you. And so just in conclusion, Nick and Drew put together this chart here that I won't go through, but it does show which committees and boards are subject to open meeting law. And I just put at the bottom, for your ease of access, the summary of our current vacancies, if we were so inclined to keep an eye out for people who might be a good fit. These would be the obvious first choices. So thank you all. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to try and answer them.
I just have one. Other than the planning and zoning board, are there any other meetings or committees that have their meetings recorded?
That I'm not sure on. I know traffic and safety does not.
Does not.
I think most others go through minutes rather than, because we don't really have an easy mechanism down in the classroom space where a lot of these committees meet in person that I'm aware of for recording. And we don't staff some of the committees that meet down there in person. So it would be up to them to find a way to record it. I do think, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, but for committees, it was like the HRC and Main Street Access Committee that are on Zoom, those meetings aren't recorded either.
Not that I'm aware of, but go ahead.
The HRC used to record meetings, or they did while I was on it.
Okay, so they might. I haven't spoken to them about an update yet. I did reach out to KK. I met KK in person at the Community Quarterly. I'm expecting to speak more with them as things develop and update accordingly.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right.
I'm curious if if all the committees feel they have what they need, if there's anything, I appreciate that more of your capacity might not be available, but if there is a committee need and we see a value in them, if that's something that there might be some future discussions we have to have about how we support the committees. So that's both city staff time, that's both funding for things that we might deem of value, and I don't know if that discussion has been had with them, and also if I can put myself forward to have those discussions with them, so it's not all on you, Ben. I think Ren and I talked about this previously, so it's something I can email you about offline, but as you said, it's a great chance just to get to connect with the committee leaders anyway, which might be a value generally for me as someone who's still getting to know the city's ins and outs, just like you. So yeah, I'm kind of curious for that, maybe not for this year's budget, but for future year's budget, about if we want our committees to do more, think more, what are ways that we then need to support them, and what's support that's actually of value to them.
That is not something that came up in this discussion, but to the extent it does come up, as again, having these ongoing, hopefully regular communications with these committees, keeping tabs on things, happy to keep that on file and pass that along.
In the interest of taking things off your plate, an idea that I remember this council discussing at the very beginning of the year was having a council member liaison to each of these committees. I think we were cautioned against that a little bit in terms of there being some potential conflict of interest whereby the council might be seen to be directing the committees, and that's inappropriate in certain circumstances. But I don't know if, Nick, you're still on and have insight on that part. If there's any reason why council members, what I recall is that it's perfectly fine for council members to attend whatever committee meetings we want to as members of the public, but we shouldn't be attending them as council people.
Well, I think the concern expressed there is that if you're attending as council members and you haven't formally established liaisons, are committee members going to view your attendance there as being a member of a council or rather as an ordinary person, and what imprint is placed upon your attendance there? So I think it's more of a transparency and perception concern. If that answers your question.
So could we then clarify a position of liaison that is an official position?
May I weigh in for a second? In the last council, we had 2 council members that were, I don't know what term was used, but 2 council members that were kind of helping the CAC with direction early on in our term. And I guess that was the CAC, and the 2 council members were Amber and Air. And so I guess, like, in what capacity were they aiding the CAC, and could that be a model for what we do going forward?
Well, I think the concern, you have to break it down between your statutory boards and your advisory boards, like the planning board and the zoning board. The zoning board in particular meant to be independent from the council, right? Because the zoning board is reviewing legislation and laws that you have enacted. So it really depends upon what the council wishes to do in terms of the support and if you want to have liaisons to your advisory committee and the scope and role of those individuals. You have that authority in your discretion. I would say it's something different for advisory committees versus statutory committees, right? You wouldn't have a council member acting as a liaison to the Board of Ethics. So I think you should really be looking
There goes the idea I had in my head.
So I think, well, I mean, I'm raising that because, I agree with what Paloma's saying, and others have said, that I want the committees to feel as supported as possible, and I've heard from multiple committees that they're not familiar with their charge, that they're not sure what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do, that people won't respond to their emails. And so if we had a council member who was there just to help them get the answers to their questions, just in a supportive role, not even making recommendations to them, but just helping them out, get their questions answered, I think would have enormous value and would probably contribute to increased output from our committees, which I think we all agree we would like.
So maybe perhaps my draft proposal is that for the committees that aren't already staffed by city employees, perhaps they can be given a council liaison with the sort of clarity, or at least attempt at clarity, that we are there to help provide information or pass information around, but not to, I guess, advise. Or I'm not sure exactly what the language is that would be appropriate. I know that when I've been going to CAC meetings, I am oftentimes just answering questions about what was decided in the last city council meeting, which feels like pretty easy but very helpful in the moment information. But I'm not, directing them to do anything.
So I would, sounds like, this would be an ad hoc process. I would kind of leave it up to each of you to decide where you want to focus your time. And if it's on CAC, like a couple did 2 years ago, bless you, go forward. I think I'd leave it at that.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, I would probably just say, Lee, if we can do it that way, but there's committees that we want to probably avoid, like planning and zoning.
Yeah.
And ethics, and I'm trying to think.
Assessment.
Board of Assessment, yeah.
And assessment.
Yep, yeah, but the others, like some of you have attended traffic safety, I think it's great, and I also think that's one of the ones that would be specific to an event that you've got constituents asking questions about. So, there's a Ward 3 street, so all of a sudden Ren's there, but, 6 months from now, she's frying other fish, right? So I would think that one, CAC, HRC, tree should be fine. Main Street, if you want, you can certainly attend, I guess, right? Yeah, I think the exceptions would be planning, you should be there as a citizen, especially if you speak, right? Zoning, very much so, right? The others, yeah, ethics, I'm not sure there are any other limitations, are there? We've had council members do Greenway stuff, but it's your choice, right?
That's great. Some of this just came about because my Ms. Manners hit me, and I realized sometime in April I had not introduced myself to so many of these chairs, and I was kind of seeing them around, and they were calling me up, they were texting me and saying, remind people about the Earth Day cleanup during the meeting, and I thought maybe I should proactively reach out to these folks and check in and see if they have announcements on a council-by-council meeting basis. But now that I see this full report, I have a clearer picture that there are some that it'll be great to introduce myself and check in with and just leave that door open. But a lot of them are well handled by city staff and have a structure that doesn't really, the planning board isn't going to have an announcement that they need a city council member to make. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for putting all of this together, seriously.
It was good for me as well, because similar to Ren, I was thinking, my job is kind of help coordinate a lot of these things, and I hadn't, spoken to some of these committees, so this was good. And I will try and keep it running up to date. So as you have questions, feel free to reach out to me directly.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to need about a minute to end the meeting after you make your motion before we start our executive session.
And yeah, we have an executive session after the meeting for personnel.
Okay. Do we need a motion to go into executive session?
Yeah, but
to discuss personnel, and then we will immediately adjourn thereafter. Did I hear a motion?
Are we waiting for Ben to get back on?
Before we end the meeting, but you can make your motion.
Yeah.
I'll make the motion then,
All right.
to end the meeting.
And to go into executive.
And to go into executive session.
To discuss
personnel issue, after which we will immediately adjourn the meeting when we return.
Thank you.
And I will second that.
There we go. So we got Molly and Justice all in favor.
Aye.
And we'll see you in a minute. All right. Thank you all.
Have a good night, Teresa.
Bye, Teresa.
Bye.